Good afternoon. Welcome to the lecture program of Hellenic Link Midwest. First, I would like to apologize for the technical problem that we had that forced us to start the lecture about 12 minutes late. I am Kostas Zanos. I'm Vice President and Chair of the Program Committee of Hellenic Link Midwest. The lecture program of Hellenic Link Midwest extends from October to May. We do not hold any lectures during the summer months, June, July, August, and also during September. These are the months that our members take their vacation, and many of us, we visit Greece. So I would like, before we start the lecture, to wish to all of you a very enjoyable summer, and we are looking forward to join us back in next October. Our speaker this afternoon is Professor Elizabeth Kosmetatou, who joins us from Springfield, Illinois. Professor Kosmetatou teaches Greek and Roman history and archaeology at the History Department of the University of Illinois, Springfield. She has participated in archaeological excavations in Greece and Turkey. Her research interests include classical Hellenistic Greek history and archaeology, early Rome, Greek and Latin epigraphy and numismatics, cultural studies, and political theory. She holds a Master of Arts and a PhD degree in classics from the University of Cincinnati, and a Bachelor of Arts in archaeology and art history from the University of Athens, Greece. We're going to close the lecture with a session of questions and answers. You can type your questions anytime during the lecture or after the lecture by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This is going to open another screen where you can type your question. Those who they attended the event on Facebook, they can type their questions on the comments box, which is at the bottom of your screen or at the bottom right of it. Professor Kosmetatou, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the kind invitation. And let me check and see and start the slideshow. So, good evening. Good afternoon, actually. I hope everybody is having a great day and is continuing to be healthy. Tonight's lecture is going to focus on the Hellenistic dynasty of the Attalids of Pergamon and their activities on the sacred island of Delos. And on the first slide, you see an aerial photo of the Acropolis of Pergamon, which was, you see it's Hellenistic and Roman phases. For example, you see this dramatic theater that was built by King Eumenes II of Pergamon, arguably one of the greatest kings of the dynasty. And this here is the temple of Emperor Trajan, which of course was built later, the 2nd century AD, but it was built on the royal palace or palaces. There were various phases. So you have to imagine here's what remains of the palace, and this is the Temple of Trajan. The excavations of Pergamon, this is the magnificent, really very impressive fortification wall. And this is the river Caicos. That's how it was called in antiquity. Today it's called Bakarchai River. And then what remains of the Acropolis. So I don't know how many of you know the Attalids, but let me give you an overview. The Attalids of Pergamon were one of the successor dynasties of Alexander the Great's kingdom, but the thing is that they were not really related to Alexander in any way, shape, or form, and we'll see how they ended up having a state at all. I'm sorry? Okay, so they ruled Pergamon from the 3rd to the 2nd through the 2nd centuries BC. So the first ruler was Philoterus. We'll talk about him quite a bit tonight. And he was not really a king. He was just a ruler of Pergamon, and he ruled from 281 to 263 BC. He was, let's see who he was. And then after that, after him came another ruler, his nephew, great-nephew, not great-nephew, actually just nephew, Eumenes the first, who was succeeded by his nephew Attalus the first, who became then the first king, actual king of Pergamon. So where's Pergamon? Someone has a... Someone has a microphone on. So this is a map of Asia Minor, and you can all see Pergamon is here. The region is called Mysia. And you see here the kingdom of Pergamon at its greatest. I mean, it's the largest it ever became. Initially, it was just a little bit of territory here. So this is what it looked like in the 2nd century. And we can also title this lecture Philoterus of Pergamon, that's the founder, from eunuch ruler to founding father. And we'll see how that was negotiated by the Attalids and how they established him as a ruler. The Attalids are quite famous for being very great spin doctors, basically for constructing their own self-conceptualization through which they established their rule as legitimate. So this is a possible portrait of Philoterus, which was discovered in the Villa dei Papiri in Herculaneum, Herculaneum and Pompeii, that were destroyed in the 1st century AD as a result of the eruption of Vesuvius. So who are the Attalids and what have they done for us? So the Attalids, as I said, were a dynasty, and you all may have heard of the Stoa of Attalos in Athens. So here's the Acropolis of Athens, and here we have the Stoa of Attalos as it was reconstructed by the American School of Classical Studies in the 50s with money from the Marshall Plan, actually. And today it houses the Agora Excavations Museum. The Agora Excavations has been conducted for at least 100 years, I believe, by the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. And, then there is another Stoa that you may or may not have heard about. It's the Stoa of Eumenes II. So the previous one, the Stoa of Attalos, is the Stoa that was built in the 2nd century by King Attalos II. And that was the son of King Attalos I and brother of King Eumenes II. So this would be the Stoa that he built next to Herodion, Herodion, and then you have the back of the Stoa that remains today, and which is being reconstructed again today, nowadays. I mean, they have enough architectural material to give us an idea of what it looked like, which is like this. The Stoa of Eumenes was built in the sanctuary of Dionysus, near the theater of Dionysus, actually, which was the first actual theater in the world, and near the temple of Dionysus, and of course on the south, to the south of the Acropolis of the Parthenon. You may or may not have heard, and probably you haven't because it's not very well known, the other Stoa of Attalos, and this is the one in Delphi. So this is the temple and oracle of Apollo at Delphi, and here you can see the Stoa of Attalos I. That's the father of Eumenes II and of Attalos II. So it's an earlier Stoa. And this is, of course, Pergamon, as I said. Again, you see the phases of the Acropolis in the under Eumenes II, and of course the Roman period. Let's look at some of the things that are important here. So as I said, the palaces are here. There are lots of stoas. The Attalids like to develop marketplaces, and this is the famous altar. I'll show you some of what is left of it. And if you have heard, perhaps the bulk of the finds of the German excavations of the altar of Pergamon are in the Berlin Pergamon Museum. Half of the altar finds were donated to Germany by the then Sultan. I think Abdul Hamid was at the time, I may be mistaken, but anyway, he did donate to the Germans, and the rest was bought by the Germans. This Acropolis was quite impressive. It had a very impressive water system, and they had actually running water. They didn't invent it, but they had it. And you may have heard also of the famous Library of Pergamon, which is here under excavation. This is a very old photograph. And some people attribute the invention of the book to the Attalids, the book as a concept. As you know, I mean, they didn't invent parchment. Parchment is, it means, it comes from carta pergamena, so it's pergamene paper. It was made out of the numerous flocks that they had there. And the legend goes that there was a rivalry. There were library wars. So there was a rivalry between the Library of Alexandria on the one hand and the Library of Pergamon, that was the second best in antiquity. So the two libraries had various rivalries. One was on Homeric studies, and that is well attested. The other one was on the acquisition of books, we hear. How much of that is conjecture or myth or whatever, we don't know, but there was actually a rivalry. And at some point, one of the Ptolemaic kings banned exports of papyrus to Pergamon. So what could the Attalids do? So they decided to basically use parchment almost exclusively, and also drop the prices of parchment, which was pretty expensive, because to create parchment is much more complicated and expensive than to just create papyrus. And then at some point, they say they came up with the idea, we don't know who exactly, of cutting basically equal pieces of paper and binding them together between two covers, placing them between two covers and creating the first book. How much of that is true, we don't know, but it is attributed to the Attalids. And this is the area of the Library of Pergamon, which was, of course, the seat of wisdom was in the sanctuary of Athena, the patroness of Pergamon. This is the entrance, actually, to the sanctuary of Athena at Pergamon. It is also in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. And here you see a bit more of that, a clearer picture. There's decoration with spoils from battles with Galatians, or Gauls as we know them, and the dedicatory inscription, King Eumenes to Athena, the bringer of victory. Basileus Eumenes Athena Nikiforo. And this would be a reconstruction of what the library, I mean, the entrance to the sanctuary would look like, and the temple of Athena and the library would be on this side. And another reconstruction of the celebration of Nikephoria. We know that there was this statue of Athena, which is a sort of copy of the famous statue of Athena Parthenos by Phidias that stood in the Parthenon. And in many ways, the Attalids wanted to recreate Pergamon as the Athens of the East of sorts, the new Athens. Almost all of them had studied in Athens and had benefited Athens in many ways. They were allies. Eumenes the First, one of the rulers, gave a garden to the Academy of Plato, the Lachideon. And the Attalids are mostly known in art because of this altar that I mentioned, which features, I mean, this is half of it reconstructed in Berlin, and it features a dramatic, beautiful gigantomachy, so the battle between the gods and the giants. You see here, the gods have been defaced by Christians. There is a reference to the altar, potential reference to the altar in the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation of John, which calls it the throne of Satan. So it is possible that Christians basically defaced the gods and left the giants alone. And of course, goddess victory crowning Athena. The altar has been called, here it is, The altar of Zeus, we don't know who it was dedicated to, possibly both Zeus and Athena, or all the gods, or the Attalid rulers, who knows. And the Attalids would like you very much, even you today, to know them as the greatest slayers of the Gauls and the preservers of the freedom of the Greeks and the freedom of everybody, just about everybody in Asia Minor who saved civilization as we know it. Of course, this is an exaggeration because the Attalids themselves hired a lot of Gauls as mercenaries because they were formidable and very large warriors. We hear that they were 6 feet tall, which was amazing for the time. And so we know that they sponsored a lot of monuments showing Gauls dying. I mean, this is possibly a copy of one of those monuments. So who were the Attalids and how did they come about? As I said, they were not exactly related to Alexander the Great. So when Alexander died, as you know, in 323, eventually his kingdom was broken down and parceled out among his main generals, most of whom were boyhood friends of Alexander, or as we would better call them, frenemies of Alexander. Anyway, so Ptolemy took Egypt. Antigonus the One-Eyed took Macedonia. Then there was Seleucus Nicator the first, who took Syria. And initially, Pergamon belonged to a fourth kingdom, which was called the Kingdom of Thrace, that was ruled by another of Alexander's boyhood friends, Lysimachus. And at some point, of course, these people, as I said, were frenemies. They were fighting each other, and the kingdom of Thrace disappeared, and Pergamon took part of it, and the rest went to the Seleucids of Syria. And eventually, Pergamon just emerged in the 3rd century. We'll see how. So these people had nothing to do with Alexander because they were not related at all. I mean, the others, yes, but not the Attalids. So let's go to the ruler, Phileteres of Pergamon. Okay, who was he? Well, you see here, and this is a bit of what is coming up. You see one of the coins that was struck by the Attalids. This one was struck, I think, by Eumenes the First, his nephew. This one by the first king of Pergamon, Attalos the First. And you see a difference here. This one here, he's wearing a wreath, a crown, as we call it. So what does it show? That he's an important person, not a king. But here, this coin, he's wearing a Hellenistic diadem, which denotes that he's king, which we know for a fact Phileteres never became. And of course, the Attalids never said that he became that, but, you know, whatever. He was their ancestor. They put a crown on him, you know, a diadem. This is what a Hellenistic diadem looks like. This one was found in Vergina, in the tomb of Philip, the so-called tomb of Philip, which has been identified as the burial of Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. So again, we have Pergamon here. Again, and this is the Attalid genealogy. So where's the problem the Attalids were? All right, so who was Phileteres, first of all? So Phileteres came from a backwater. When I say backwater, that's what the ancients said, Paphlagonia, the Black Sea. Okay, the Paphlagonians were supposed to be barbarians. Everybody made fun of them. For example, Aristophanes, Lucian, later on called them people anthropi pachis ke ilithii. That's how he called them. Basically morons and idiots, basically. So he came from a little city called Tion, and he was the son reportedly of a guy called Attalos. Now, was he Attalos? Was he Attalis? Was he something? We don't know. But we know his mother was called Boa and that she was a prostitute. So she was an avlitris, so she played flute in symposia. I mean, possibly a prostitute. Anyway, so Phileteres was the son of those two people, and he was a eunuch. In other words, he was castrated. I mean, we are sure of that. And the Attalids never said that he was. They say, yes, he was. That was not good in antiquity. people didn't castrate themselves. Obviously, someone else castrated them, but that was terrible. And they were supposed to be the object of ridicule. Servants, love slaves, whatever else. It was even you could swear and call someone a eunuch. So this guy, so he was not of royal birth under any stretch of the imagination. He was just a civil servant that possibly worked for the Persians. And we know in antiquity, the Persians exacted three kinds of tribute from their peoples, the people that lived under them. The one was armies, and the second one was money. The third one was young children that they castrated and then they trained as civil servants. The concept was that if they castrated someone, then this someone would not revolt, overthrow whoever was the boss, and take over, because they wouldn't have any children to leave their whatever to. Okay, that was the concept, which was always, it proved them wrong, because this had happened before, actually in Pergamon as well. So Philetaerus is a guy who obviously probably, we know he died in 263, and he was 80 years old. So he was born around 343. He was probably there in Persia when Alexander the Great conquered the place. We know that he immediately switched sides and went to serve Alexander's generals, Dolkimos and Antigonus the One-Eyed, and eventually Lysimachus. And he was very, very smart. And he obviously served those people in such a way that he won their trust. And Lysimachus made him his, let's say, secretary of the treasury. Basically, he was in charge of the treasury of the kingdom of Thrace. And he said, okay, we need to put you somewhere safe. So we have this little thing, that city there, another backwater called Pergamon, go there. So he sat there and he held the treasure. And here it was 7,000 talents. It was a lot of money. So what happened next is that, as I said, the generals of Alexander the Great were fighting among each other. And at some point, Lysimachus and Seleucus the first, they went to war. And Philetaerus, I don't want to get into why, it's a very long story, will just derail the lecture. But anyway, Philetaerus had reasons to join Seleucus and say, well, I'm nearer to you and I have a lot of money. What do you say? And Seleucus said, thanks for the money. Stay in Pergamon and keep the money, just what you were doing. And, you're the boss there. At the same time, Philetaerus decided to arrange for a succession. So he had a brother called Eumenes, and he just said, okay, so Eumenes, my brother, is going to be my successor since I don't have children. I can't have children, and which basically shows you that you can castrate someone all you want and expect them not to have children, but nothing in the world can stop them from having a brother, having a nephew. So at some point, Eumenes dies, and the successor of Philetaerus becomes his nephew, Eumenes the First. So there is further fighting between the Seleucids and, well, some more of the friends of Alexander and their descendants, and Seleucus the First gets killed. So Philetaerus buys the body, cremates it properly, gives it honors, and sends it to the successor, Antiochus the First. And Antiochus the First is so grateful that he says, you know something? How about I let you have qualified autonomy in Pergamon, but just don't become a king. Just stay there, don't become a king. And he says, yeah, sure, whatever you want. And apparently he did such a good job that he even said, okay, so I have this niece, daughter, whatever, Antiochus. So would you like to marry her off to your nephew Attalids? Sure. So they had this girl marry Attalids. And the two of them had another son called Attalos, who eventually became the first king of Pergamon. And then Attalus had those 4 sons, Eumenes first, Attalus the second, Phileteris, and Athenaeus. And eventually, Eumenes and Stratonice had Attalus the third, not the second, like right here. And that's the last king of Pergamon. So let's look at the dynasty a little bit more. So we're going to be concentrating now on, before that, when Eumenes the first died, he leaves the kingdom to his nephew Attalus the first, as I said. And Attalus the first continued to be a ruler, not a king, just a ruler of that territory. All the Attalid rulers had made sure they had good neighborly relationships, especially with Greek cities in Asia Minor, assisting them, especially when they were raided by Gauls. And eventually, Attalus I scored a very significant victory here against the Gauls in the 230s BC. So he said, okay, what am I doing here? I'm independent. I mean, Eumenes I had seen to it that he had declared independence. And so he becomes king, and he calls himself henceforth King Attalus I of Pergamon. And his goal from then on was to gain as much territory as he could in Asia Minor and basically grow the kingdom. And he had a bunch of enemies. So the enemies were the Seleucids, of course, in Syria, who didn't like the fact that they lost a piece of the kingdom, and also Macedonia, the Antigonids. All right, so in the late 3rd century, Attalus I decided to legitimize himself as a proper king and a giant of diplomacy and politics and a great player in the Hellenistic affairs. So he picks the island of Delos, which is here in the Aegean, near Mykonos, in order to showcase his dynasty. Right? He was not the first of the dynasty. A lot of people had, not a lot of people. Phileteris and Eumenes I had done it before him, but their dedications, they were of limited scope and small compared to his. So here's Delos today. This is the museum, by the way. And whatever is left of the port, the harbor, Delos is destroyed. It was destroyed in the 1st century BC, and it was abandoned since then. So today you can only go there for like 3 hours and just see the antiquities and leave on a small boat or larger boat. The sea is always rough and terrible, so make sure you have Dramamine with you, because I can't guarantee that you're going to come out in one piece otherwise. And this is the Temple of Isis, for example. And we're going to concentrate on various dedications by Attalus I, especially this monument called the Phileteris base. It was the base of a bronze statue that has disappeared of Phileteris, and it has an epigram here that you see in Greek, of course. So we're going to be talking about the date of this base, the reconstruction of Phileteris' story by Attalus I, the construction of Attalid royal fiction and legitimation of the dynasty's identity, Attalus's activities in Greece around the time of the First Macedonian War. So it was the Pergamins and most cities in Greece against the Macedonians, who were trying to dominate everybody. The treatment of Attalid Galatian victories, how memory was forged in a sanctuary setting, the process followed. The Hellenistic victory monuments of Attalus I, the sculptural and epigrammatic contests of the time. We'll see also how to date inscriptions on the basis of their lettering, the date of 2 sculptors that were famous in antiquity for working with the Attalids, Nikiratos and Phiromachos, and the career of a new traveling Hellenistic epigrammatist by the name of Sosicrates, who was not known before this base was found. So here's Pergamon again. And at this point, this is how big Pergamon is under Attalus I. So again, this is the Acropolis of Pergamon. This is the altar, theater, the palaces. And this is the theater again. And this is the modern Turkish, I guess, city by now, which is called Bergama. And a reconstruction of the Acropolis. Again, this is the altar, this is the library, the sanctuary of Athena, the theater, the palaces. No, so this is the sanctuary of Athena. So no, this is anyway, and the palaces. So yeah, and this is Attalus the First. And actually, this is a very interesting head. It belonged to a statue once upon a time that hasn't been found. This head was probably made during the time that Attalus was not a king yet. And so when he became a king, they had to make an adjustment on his head, add some hair here and a diadem. So what did Attalus do? We know from inscriptions and from whatever is left that he created a Philateros group, the one on the base. He set up a statue in honor of his general Epigenes. He set up a victory monument for himself on the occasion of his Galatian victories. He set up a dynastic group monument called Progonoi, that's the ancestors of the mythical ancestors of the dynasty, because he linked himself to the local histories of Pergamon as well. And the sponsorship of 2 Diliades courses. So he sponsored celebrations in honor of Philateros and of himself, of course, for which he dedicated 2 commemorative drinking cups called fiale, and which was pretty heavy. It was about half a kilo of, or 1 pound of silver. Okay, so here's again Delos, Pergamon, and Athens there with a green dot. And so which monuments are we talking about? These are the sea urchins. They're very dangerous. So this is the theater of Delos. This is the Epigenes base, the South Stoa, which has been linked to the Attalids, the Philateros base at the end of it, and the Galatian monument of Attalus the First. And here, what is left? So Galatian victory monument, Philateros base, the Epigenes base is here. The Stoa of Philip V, they say he built it in front of the southern Stoa so that he could block the Attalid monuments from being seen by those sailing into Delos. So first of all, he needed to clean up the origins of the dynasty because, okay, he was not going to say that Philateros was, an aristocrat, because he wasn't. So we hear from Strabo, one of the writers, that he said that that basically the whole eunuch thing was an accident. It was a tragic accident. It wasn't done on purpose. So apparently, he came from a good family, and he had gone out with when he was a baby, he went out with his nanny, and they went to this funeral, which was very big, and there was a lot of people, and basically they were crushed by the crowd. So as his nanny, I don't know, hugged him, I suppose, she crushed his testicles, I don't know, but that's what they were saying. So it was an accident. He wasn't a servant. He was just an honorable, very noble person who just, he didn't know what to do. And since he didn't have any testicles anymore, his folks said, well, why doesn't he go to be trained as a civil servant for the Persians? Again, Pergamon. And he came from Paphlagonia. As I said, this is a backwater. I mean, really, nobody noble comes from there. And we know that nobody bought it. Very few people bought it in antiquity because about the story we know, for example, there was a satirist called Daphitas who wrote a mocking poem against Philateros and the Attalids, calling them just the servants of Lysimachus. He called them actually a lot worse, but anyway. So Philateros minted his own coins. First of all, he minted some coins under the name of Lysimachus, with Alexander the Great on the obverse with the horns of Ammon. And then when he became basically the representative of Seleucus I of Pergamon, Seleucus said, okay, you have to put my head here, but he allowed him to put here his name. You see Athena, the protectors of Pergamon, the patroness of Pergamon, and the legend Phileteru. That's a coin struck by Phileterus. Okay, again, that's Pergamon. So eventually his successor, Eumenes I, struck the coins with the founder's portrait, probably when he declared independence for Pergamon. And he decided that's our, that's our ruler. This is the founder. Yes, he was a eunuch. Yes, he gained weight because he didn't have any testosterone left, whatever. So what? But as I said, in antiquity, people didn't really appreciate these rags to riches stories. So yeah, they had to come up with a story about the funeral and the testicles and the crushing crowds. In basically striking his own coins, he followed various other types. For example, Alexander the Great who put Zeus crowning his name, Basileus Alexandrou. So here we have Eumenes I having the name Phileteru crowned by Athena. Just like Lysimachus had Alexander the Great and Lysimachu. It says Basileus but Lysimachu, and Victory is crowning the name. And we see other kings who do the same. Okay. So what else did the Attalids dedicate there? We know there was just a statue of Phileterus, probably dedicated by his brother Eumenes. Come on, which was not much to write home about. But then we have that elaborate statue or statue group by Attalus I. So here's the Phileterus base, the Epigenes base, the South Stoa Philip. And this is the monument today. And the Galatian monument, you see, it's quite modest compared to the Phileterus base. So even though Attalus I was the one who scored the big victories against the Gauls, and we know from history that Phileterus probably paid off the Gauls not to attack Pergamon and didn't really score any victories that we know of, Attalus decided to showcase the founder as founder of the dynasty, as a founding father of Pergamon and Galatian slayer, and himself as the person who continues this sort of tradition. And here again, this is the Phileterus base. So what does it say? Okay, so happy Phileterus, it says. Blessed Phileterus, you are well known, my lord, equally among divine inspired poets and ingenious sculptors. Your great might both proclaim, these with hymns, the others through a display of their cunning handicraft. This is how you once joined swift Ares against the Celts, unfortunate in war, and drove them far beyond the borders of your land. For which deeds, let these picked out works of Niceratus be yours. So Socrates dedicated a memorial on wave-washed Delos to be famously sung even by future generations. Not even Hephaestus himself, beholding these, would censure their craft. What does the epigraph tell us? First of all, there are some interesting words. Happy or blessed. It suggests that the word makar in ancient Greek. So it suggests that Phileterus is dead and potentially deified, or he's above all mortals in death. And he's called my lord, which in the Greek text is anax. This is a word that we find already in Homer. We find it in Linear B tablets, and it was some sort of important title for Mycenaean rulers or aristocrats. It came to be king. So he can't call him Basileus, who is the king in Greek. because he wasn't one. But he has to call him something close. So he found Anax. Okay, Anax. He uses a lot of, he sprinkles some Homeric expressions that we know from Homer. And then he talks about these victories, presumed victories. He doesn't say where they were. On the other hand, when he writes about his own victories, he just tells you which Gauls he killed, where he killed them and all that. But, you know, Philaeterus, your guess is as good as mine. And as good as his, probably. But there's another important thing. He refers to something interesting. To begin with, as I said, there was already a series of celebrations in honor of Philaeterus already under, Philaeterus had made some dedications and had sponsored some choirs, some Delian choirs by the Delian maidens. They were very famous. And then Eumenes I had made an endowment so that they would do that every year. And Attalos decided to make one of those years very big, a very big deal. He dedicated a huge fiale. As we see, he set up those these sculptures, including the sculpture that I'm talking about, this one, and he also sponsored, we hear, a competition among sculptors, which was something they did sometimes in antiquity when people had money and wanted to create an important work. So he sponsored two things. One is a statue for his ancestor and one poem, an epigram. So apparently the people who won the contest were Nikiratos, who made the statue, or the statues, because it says works, ekrita erga, not ergon, but erga. And then Sosicrates is the guy who composed this epigram. And the epigram is written in a style that is well embedded in Greek epigram tradition. And as I said, it's sprinkled with a lot of Homeric words. So he's one of them. He's one of the greats. And we have to assume that it was a victory monument. It's not very big. I mean, it's big, but not, you can't put a lot of stuff on it. So we have to assume it was something like this. This is the 4th century, for example, relief. Maybe it was a bronze statue showing Philaeterus killing a Gaul. Possible. We don't know. How do we date this? When did Attalos come there? So we can date according to the lettering of the inscriptions. There is a whole tradition. I mean, there's a lot of scholarship on this. So this is the Philaeterus base. It is dated in the Hellenistic period and certainly 3rd century, and a bit later than this one, which is one of the inventories of the temples of Delos. And then it looks very similar to this one, which is an Attic inscription from Athens, basically, that is dated to the last decade of the 3rd century. Same thing with the Progony monument. This is part of this Progony monument, the ancestors of Evmenis Evmenu to Philaeteru Adelphou. That's, you know, the Eumenes I and Kesatyras tis Poseidoniou. So they had married into good Greek families once Philaeterus became important. And it's one of those traditions that they hold. Even the Ptolemies set up those family groups, or Familiengruppe, as the Germans call them. And of course, he also promotes himself indirectly through his ancestors' deeds. We know that Attalos was sponsoring lots of dying Gauls and Gallic, monuments and battles and so forth, right and left. This is possibly something that is related to one of those Attalid monuments. I don't think there is a lot of evidence, because a lot of people killed Gauls in those days. I mean, they had armies of Gauls killing other Gauls, and they were setting up statues, or the Gaul that commits suicide after killing his wife, so that, I don't know, Attalos doesn't come and kill him. Another fighting and dying Gaul. And one of the most important contemporary monuments that Attalos sponsored around 200 BC was a massive monument that was set up to the south of the Parthenon in Athens. So this is what remains of it, just some bases. And it featured a gigantomachy, so the mythical battle of the giants against the gods, and the Amazons against the Greeks, and Gauls against the Attalids, and so forth. And he did that to commemorate his own victories. So he was doing that during the last decade of the 3rd century in important places. The bases are basically dated on the basis of their construction, the base here. And you have to imagine this is the Parthenon, so the Galatomachi, this is the Gauls against the Attalids, I suppose, the Persians against the Greeks, the Amazons against the Greeks, and the giants against the gods. And here you have 2 colossal statues of Eumenes II and Attalus II, which were set up later. So basically, Attalus is trying to place himself and his dynasty in the whole Greek tradition of all these victories and the victory monuments. So this is a reconstruction. Sorry, the book is, yeah. So this is what they looked like. And what about the various artists? So as I said, Socrates, we only know him from this one epigram. He must have had other work. Phiromachos and Nikiratos were 2 sculptors that worked together. So Nikiratos made the sculptures for the Philateros base. We know that he worked with Phiromachos, so we know some of the Phiromachos works. Obviously, 3rd century, again, the letters say this. And so, when do we date this monument? So we can tell that it was around we don't know exactly when Antikratos was the archon of Delos, but it's around this time. Philateros is cast posthumously as a philosopher ruler. There was, as I said, a precedent in Pergamon. Another eunuch, servant of the Persians, became very big. Hermias of Atarneus in the 4th century. He was a philosopher, and he was one of the students of Aristotle. So again, he is a famously great warrior, and uncrowned king of Pergamon. And it is through these activities that Attalus constructs this royal fiction for his dynasty, basically telling them, everybody, I may not be related to Alexander, but like Alexander, we also fought and we won our territory by the spear because nobody else cared. We saved civilization, we saved Asia Minor, we saved the Greeks, we saved ourselves. So what we have done is what the Greeks called spear won, so thoriktiton. So he won Pergamon in his own right, and actually he didn't do it first. He suggests that Philateros did it before him. So all these dedications are associated with Attalus' the first victories and activities in Greece around the time of the First Macedonian War, during which he created this charm offensive on Delos and staged a big appearance, a royal appearance. And so he sponsors this memorable Diliades chorus with the sculptural and epigrammatic competitions, a dynastic appearance with pomp. So as I said, we have learned a lot of things based on just this base and a few other bits and pieces that survive today on Delos. Attalus the First was succeeded by Eumenes II, and this is one of the few coins, there are 3 only that we know of Eumenes II. Again, he's wearing a diadem, he was a king, and here you see the Dioscoroi. He worked very closely with his brother and successor Attalus II. So it says Basileus Evmenu here, and it's a silver coin. This one is in Paris. He and his brother built this magnificent altar. He also forged a closer relationship with the Romans that his father had started, actually, and it wasn't that his father had started it alone. The Greeks were looking increasingly to the Romans for help against the Macedonians and other predators, as they felt, and against the Seleucids. So, of course, all this conflict among the Greeks led to the eventual domination of Rome, which took over. And eventually, but we know that Eumenes started having more ambitions, and he even stopped minting those coins in honor of Philateros. He moved away from Philateros And he created his own coinage, the so-called Sistophoric coinage, which starts in the 2nd century after the big peace of Apamea, which expanded the Pergamon kingdom. He was succeeded by his brother Attalus II and eventually his son Attalus III, who was a man we hear I was not very much interested. He was an okay king. Some people say he wasn't. He was paranoid. But in general, people talk about him with a lot of admiration, especially the Dr. Galen. And Galen came from Pergamon. He lived centuries later, but he admired Attalus III because he was actually interested in becoming a doctor. And he actually wrote medical works that don't survive, but which Galen had read and used in his work. He worked a lot on trauma, on pharmacology. He made some serious discoveries for the time, and he died at the age of 33 of sun exposure. I mean, sunstroke, something like that. So where had he was building a tomb for his mother, we hear. And since he died childless, and the Romans had increasingly started to take over Pergamon and had granted only certain territories to Pergamon, he decided to leave Pergamon free and some of the old cities that Pergamon held, but the territories that Rome controlled, he left to the Roman people. There was some opposition to that. For example, there was a pretender called Aristarchus. We think he was, maybe he wasn't. He said he was an illegitimate son of Eumenes II, but eventually he was also subdued by the Romans, and the Romans took over and turned the whole of Asia Minor into the province of Asia eventually. So those are the Attalids, and thank you for your attention. I hope I didn't confuse anybody, but I'm open to any questions you have. Questions?
I'm asking Kostas to unmute himself.
Thank you very much, Professor Kosmetatou, for this very fascinating lecture. We will proceed now to the questions and answers. Let me first ask a question to give also the chance to the audience to write their own questions. How the Galatians, they came into the region? Did they came by land? They came by the sea? How did they came over there?
Oh, there were various Galatian raids from the north and, all over the place. They even created their own kingdom, which was one of the kingdoms in Asia Minor. And it was very much supported by the Romans.
So the Gauls who came from what is France today, is that correct?
Yeah.
The Galatians? Yeah, okay.
Galatians are the Gauls who came to Asia Minor and Greece. They had already attacked Greece. I mean, the Vergina, tumulus, where they found those untouched graves, they only survived because the Gauls had raided during the reign of Antigonus Gonatas and had raided almost all the tombs except from those two that Antigonus covered with even more earth, and it was almost impossible to excavate even for Andronicus, so he had to bring bulldozers to remove the earth because they tried to protect those tombs from the Gauls. And then the Gauls are the ones usually we call the people who invade Rome and the West, Gauls, and the others are called Galatians, but I call them Gauls so that I don't confuse people too much.
Okay. Now, let me go to another question. Somebody asked, what motivated you to do this study?
Oh, I wrote my dissertation on the public image of the Attalids, so the dynastic propaganda of the Attalids. At first, I wanted to do something on dynastic propaganda of one of the Hellenistic dynasties. So at first, I said all the dynasties, but it was an enormous project. There are too many and too much information. So I decided to focus on one dynasty. I took a year. I actually didn't like the Attalids much because every professor of mine was chasing me to study them from Athens to Cincinnati and everything. And then one day, my mouth opened. Seriously, someone asked me, did you pick a dynasty? And my mouth opened and it said the Attalids. So I've been devoted to them ever since. And as I told you before the lecture, I even named my first dog Attalos. Yeah. Yeah. At first I said I named him after the Attalids. When he died and I was devastated, I said, no, the Attalids took their name from him, which is something that he would think as well.
And another question from the same person. Why in the epigrams there is no space between words? Because it's difficult to read it. So how it came that they are connecting the words without any space?
Because they didn't connect, they didn't disconnect the words. They didn't write, I mean, they never did until very, very late. I mean, in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't. Once I discussed it with one of my epigraphy teachers, and he said that he thought that, and it is possible that when we speak, I mean, these people talk a lot. I mean, it's not like you can buy books and sit there in a corner and read, but they speak with, you know, in a way of, you know, they speak in prosody, as we say. But the thing is that they understood language as a whole. So when you speak, you don't separate the words, you just speak. And, you know, whoever understood. And so I think they were also understood written language like that.
The same way. Okay, another question from Saradis Alexopoulos. Is there anything published about your excavations in Turkey that we could read?
Sure, lots. What do you read? Well, about the Attalids, there's lots. I mean, you can go to my academia.edu page and download whatever you want, whatever I've written on the Attalids, but I'm not the only person, of course. There was a book written by, I mean, it was an edited volume by Peter Toneman about the Attalids of Asia Minor, something like that. And 2013. I would say stick with more recent work because there's a lot. The Germans published a lot. They have a whole series in German, of course, called the Altertümer von Pergamon. But they also, I mean, there's lots on the Attalids. There's an enormous bibliography. There are a lot of articles. Again, if you go to academia and if you're not a member, you can become a member for free. Just say you're an independent scholar. Don't pay them for anything. And if you cannot really look for something, what you can do is go to google.com and type in quotations academia.edu and outside quotations, whatever you want, the Attalids, for example. It'll lead you to everything that people have uploaded there on the Attalids. There's also another book that was published, I think, by Wolfgang Rath, who was the excavator of Pergamon in the 90s. And it talks, I mean, there's a great article by Greg Nage about Pergamon, the Pergamon Library, which I think Nage has published online as well, on the website of the Center for Hellenic Studies of Harvard, chs.harvard.edu. And let me see the Rath book. Rath was the director of the excavations of Pergamon in the 90s. There is Pergamon, an archaeological guide on Amazon. It's okay. It's very, I mean, it's a good guide, but you won't learn a lot about the Attalids. There's another one which was published, I think, by the Theological School of Harvard. Let me check my phone because that's where I have my books. Okay, so let me see. So book catalog, because I scan all the ISBNs, and let's see what, there are other books, but they're old and I wouldn't suggest the older ones. So Pergamon. There is one which is an edited volume from Pergamon to Sperlonga, Sculpture and Context. But I would say, yes, Pergamon, Citadel of the Gods, Harvard Theological Studies, archaeological record, literary description, and religious development. It talks about a lot of things, not about only the Attalid religion and so forth, but even later, how the Christians understood Pergamon and so forth. The archaeological guide. Yes, Attalid Asia Minor, Money, International Relations, and the State. That's Toneman. So I would suggest those and articles. I mean, just download articles.
Okay, the next question is from Patricia Camperos. What is the name of the building where you are sitting? It's magnificent.
Oh,
she asked the question about the background picture.
That's the Library of Tianjin in China. It's a library. So, for example, if you look at, I don't know, can you see where I put all these things around here? They're books. And it's called the Eye. So that's an office. And so because it has this, it's called the Eye. And so.
Thank you. The next question is from Savas Koktoglu. Is Turkey demanding the return of the altar of Zeus from Germany?
Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay. Okay.
But, well, the Germans say, look, we have a receipt, you know.
Okay.
We have a receipt. And the other thing is the Greeks actually wrote a book shortly after 1922. You know, the Pergamon Greeks after 1922, they fled to Mytilene. Okay. And so many of them stayed there, others went elsewhere. And I mean, for example, one of the hotels where I stayed there when I was in Pergamon belonged to a Greek general who fled in 1922. And the Turkish owners told me, you know, there was a great general here. He was Greek and he lived here and all that. And if you want to know about him. And so, so they're kind of proud of that heritage. And they tell me this was the Greek area. This was the Greek neighborhood. And so they have been very friendly, actually. But the Greeks and the Germans actually agree with the Greeks who say that that basically they say the Turks, now I don't know if it was only the Turks, they would find these sculptures from the altar and they would burn them to create limestone. Am I saying, no, asbestos? Plaster. There you go. Yeah, sorry, I'm not a chemist. I was very bad in chemistry, but that's what they did. And actually a German colleague said, you know, and they were told not to do it and they continued. So, you know, we Germans saved it, they basically say. But, you know, there are a lot of stories going like that. I don't know personally, but this is what everybody says. Well, what do you want? You know, like it's going for money. Yeah.
The next question is from Saradis Alexopoulos. Can you say a few words about your excavations in Turkey?
My excavations?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have my own excavation, but I took part in an excavation. It's called the Sagalassos excavation. It was at the time run by the late, recently died, Mark Valkens. And it was an ancient city. It's mostly, it survives in its Roman phase. Because it was more Romanized. It's called Sagalassos. The village there is called Alasun. Obviously, it comes from Sagalassos. And I spent a summer there excavating. I have published actually parts of some monuments, so you can find also those on academia. One was the Northeast Hiron, and the other one, a bunch of Macedonian shields that were found in Sagalassos in the necropolis. I mean, they are tombstones with Macedonian shields.
The next question from Savas Koktoglu. Do you happen to have any idea when the Pergamon Museum in Berlin is going to reopen?
No.
No.
They had recently yes, and I forgot the most important thing. There was, actually, thanks for the question. There was an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 2016, which was called Pergamon Metropolis and the Hellenistic Kings, or something like that. And metropolis of Hellenistic world. So it's available in English, obviously, and you can get it from Amazon. It's the catalog. It's very good. And because the Pergamon Museum was closed, they got a lot of pieces from there and from other museums. And it was like the first time I saw things together from, they also had a small exhibition about the new finds of the Antikythera excavations in Greece.
The next question is from Nicholas Janaros.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. How did the Attalids become so powerful and rich to donate so many in different Greek cities?
Well, they were very good in handling money once. Well, okay, they didn't have a stock market,
But
but
they did not invest at the time, I suppose.
no, but they did this. I mean, they had, first of all, that's a great question as well. They had, I think they were the masters of the silk trade of the time in the area, and they had silk workshops. Actually, when Attalus III died, I believe he left a lot of all these royal workshops because they were royal. They were basically controlled
Owned and operated by
the royal,
the king.
and so they were operated by slaves. But I think he let the slaves, you know, he freed the slaves, or I think, but he left all that to the Romans. So the silk trade, they weren't involved in the silk route, I don't think so, but they were getting the silk, and they were doing that. They also were very big in animal husbandry. Okay, he has enemies. Anyway, my dog. Okay, yeah, there was silk. There was a lot of, there was animal husbandry, parchment trade, of course, because their own, whatever, the processing of parchment was probably very good. I mean, it's a very fertile area as well, agriculture. Yeah.
Very good. The next one is from Cecilia. How did the Germans succeed in taking the whole temple to Germany?
Oh, well, Human, it's a very spectacular find. So what happened is that when it was discovered, Haman, who was the excavator, said that he sent famously a telegram to Germany, which ran, wir haben eine ganze Epoche gefunden. We just found a whole new era. We discovered a new era because of the sculpture. I mean, the sculptures are spectacular. And so, well, he went to the Sultan and said, can I buy it? And the Sultan said, you can buy half of it and the other half you can have. And actually he was, the archaeologist was buried actually there.
Okay, the next question, it's my question. Was there any sense of common heritage and kinship among the Hellenistic kingdoms to cultivate cooperation instead of conflict? Because you mentioned lots of conflict.
No, I mean, you won't hear these people say the Greek humanis. I mean, if you asked him, I'm sure he would say, yeah, I mean, Greek heritage and stuff. But on the other hand, you would say, okay, I need to close the door because my dog has enemies.
Okay.
So no, there was no real, I mean, yes, I mean, I guess ultimately, on some level, they realized they had some common heritage. They were Greeks, but I mean, the Greeks usually called themselves not, I don't know, Pericles Greek. He called himself Pericles Athenian. Greek city-states believed in their autonomy. Autonomy was everything. Actually, when Aristarchus first took over Pergamon, the Romans, who didn't know what to do with the Pergamene heritage, they said, well, okay, fine, yeah, then we will have another client king there. But Ephesus said, whoa, wait a minute, you know, like Attalus III, and by the way, this is a bastard son, we don't want him, and we don't know even if he's real, but you know, Attalus III said, we're autonomous, we want our autonomy, please, you know, we need it. And I mean, Miletus and stuff, I think, I don't know. And so then there was a war, and the Romans, of course, didn't like wars because this was a buffer kingdom there. And so they sent a couple of consuls who got killed. Then Aristarchus raised the slaves because nobody wanted really a kingdom anymore. And there was no question of the Antigonids, teaming up with the Seleucids and the Pergamins and Bactria and I don't know what, and create a whole thing. And if you asked Athens, Athens was very much against. And actually, Attalids I died as follows. He was 78 years old, and he came to Greece in 197. So he was pretty old when he did these things in Delos, and he came to basically discuss the rise of Greece against the Macedonians, because Macedonians wanted to conquer everything and all that. And so he came there, and he held a speech in Thebes. And during the speech, he was so upset, we hear, that he had a stroke. And he dropped down, and he was like paralyzed, we hear. And then they put him in the boat and said, okay, let's go to Pergamon, because, what else are we going to do? And during the trip, he had another stroke, and so he arrived dead. So yeah, and there was the Macedonian War, the Second Macedonian War. There were a lot of wars. So no, they didn't understand. The same thing with Alexander the Great. The Greeks despised him. And he had to really subdue them in order to. They didn't care about the thing about Greece. There was this idea of pan-Hellenism that was brought forward by certain intellectuals like, Isocrates, and who played into Philip II's hands, who said, whatever, yes, pan-Hellenism, that's what we're going to do. But right, it wasn't something. There was no unified really identity. They knew that they were Greeks and they were speaking Greek and everything. It's fine. But if you asked Eumenes, he would say, I'm Pergamin. Would they ask him if he's Paphlagonian? He would say, absolutely not. Now, I guess ultimately I'm Greek or something. But they weren't. This debate didn't really go on at the time.
So in some sense, the Romans, they were invited into the region.
They were invited by the Attalids, actually. Well, this is how the Romans ended up there. They had nothing to do with Pergamon. They didn't even care about one another. But what happened is that there was the Second Punic War. And the Second Punic War was terrible for the Romans. They almost lost. I mean, it took them years and years to beat Hannibal. And so what happened is that Hannibal, at some point, they didn't know what else to do. And so they opened the Sibylline books. They said whenever they had a problem, there were the Sibylline books. And what did Sibyl say so many hundreds of years ago? She said, go to Asia Minor and introduce the cult of Cybele, so the Magna Mater. It's very important. If you do that, Hannibal is toast. And so who do we know in Asia Minor? There's this king, Attalids I. So shall we write him? Can you please give us can you facilitate the transfer of the cult of Magna Mater? So Attalids says, absolutely, I need allies, yes. And so, but they didn't even have an alliance because the Romans didn't offer these kinds of alliances. What they had is an amikitia at best, like a philia, as they called it in Greek. So they had like diplomatic relations. And then when they were very obliged, they said to Attalids, oh, thank you very much for facilitating this. And then eventually they beat Hannibal. But when they beat Hannibal, Hannibal, who was supposed to facilitate the payment of indemnity to the Romans and the peace and everything, the Romans were very suspicious of him. They wanted to kill him. And so he fled to Asia Minor, and he fled first to Syria. And so Antiochus III said, oh, yes, and I was thinking of conquering the whole of Asia Minor, including Pergamon. Shall we do it together? And of course, he said, sure, let's do it. He almost killed Eumenes, actually. But anyway, Eumenes, of course, went to the Romans and said, well, I'm saying it that's a very, very simplistic way of narrating the events, of course. But he said, look at him, they took in Hannibal, they're against you, and the Romans are like, now the whole world is against us. So in order to deal with this, he had to, they said, okay, sure, indeed, they're supporting Hannibal. Eventually, Hannibal fled to Bithynia because he didn't, Antiochus didn't want to get into really serious trouble with the Romans. And of course, they got involved in the whole thing. There are a lot of reasons why the Greeks, the Romans entered the Hellenistic East, but The Attalids brought them to Asia Minor, yes. And it was because they were going to, they were, again, it was not, the Attalids and the rest of the Greeks, because they said, if you don't help us, who is? We have Philip V on the one hand, we have, Antiochus III, there is Bithynia, I mean, help, what are we going to do? And so, yeah. And once the Romans came, they came to stay, which is something the Greeks hadn't really.
So actually the Romans, they did not have a plan to conquer.
No, the Rome is the accidental empire in many ways. I mean, not quite, but again, it's a simplistic way of seeing it. But there are two good books to read about the subject. The one is by Eric Gruen, Gruen. It's called The Hellenistic World and the Coming of Rome. And the other one is by a guy called Eckstein, Eckstein. And that's called Rome Enters the Hellenistic East, the Greek East or something. And it's a very good one because Eckstein's book is recent, and it is relatively recent, 2010, and it is about international relations as well.
Then another question: what was the actual Greek population of these kingdoms? Were there many Greeks in these kingdoms?
There were a lot of different people. Okay, sorry, I have to plug myself in. Yeah, there were a lot of various populations, indigenous and Greek population, lots of Greeks, of course, and Greek was also the international language of the time. We know Mysia had its own language, but the dominant language was Greek, and it became Greek. Then there was Lycian language, Pisidian, Pamphylian, Phrygian, you name it. But, there were a lot of Greeks, of course, and the Greek cities and so forth. And there was a lot of syncretism, even in the cults. I mean, if you look at the cult of Artemis of Ephesus, it doesn't look only Greek. I mean, it looks Anatolian and Greek together. It fuses. It's like, okay, in Egypt, there were a lot of Greeks, but they were a minority. The majority were Egyptians, of course. But there were also Jews in Egypt, and we have also Semitic Phoenicians and so forth, like in Lebanon and in the Levant. There are lots of populations. Yes, they have I don't think they are so much responsible for one or the other. And I think mostly people think, I'm in Pergamon, I'm a Pergamene. I'm in Syria, I'm a Syrian. Yeah.
So they don't feel like Greek, they don't identify as Greek.
They don't identify themselves as Greek the same way we do today. I mean, the national nation is an 18th, 19th century concept.
Sure.
I mean, yeah, they speak Greek, of course. Even the Jews in Egypt speak Greek, and that was actually a problem. That's why we have the translation of the Old Testament. I mean, actually the Torah and the Hebrew Bible into Greek, because people didn't know any Hebrew to read it anymore. And so they decided to basically sponsor a translation under the reign of Ptolemy II.
Okay, the next question is from Cecilia. What is the relationship between these Seleucids and the Persian Seleucid Empire?
The Persian Empire?
It says she wants to say if there is any relationship between the
Seleucids and the Persian Seleucid Empire.
Yes.
The Seleucid, okay. The Syria was part of the Persian Empire. So Alexander the Great had Syria. So that part, and Syria actually, okay, when we say Syria, we don't necessarily mean what we mean Syria today. When we say Macedonia, we don't mean necessarily in all periods what we mean by Macedonia today. So Syria is a kingdom that initially includes the whole of Asia Minor and Syria, and so large parts of Anatolia. It even had India, parts of India, but they gave up those parts very early on. So they called it Kingdom of Syria. Seleucus is the first king, so it's the Seleucid dynasty. So it's the same thing.
Yeah. And the next question is from Nicholas Giannaros. would you suggest for a recent graduate of archaeology, as I am, to study further and focus to the Hellenistic period and art? Do you continue your excavations?
I don't excavate anymore. I mean, again, the
Mm.
excavations in Turkey were by Mark Valkens. Now they're headed by Jeroen Poblome. And but I don't know if you are passionate about archaeology. And yes, I mean, the Hellenistic period is very interesting. There's a lot to be done. I don't think that people are done doing it. And so, yeah, and actually there is a sort of renaissance of Hellenistic studies. At the time that I worked on the Attalids, there was not much being done. I think some people were saying, why the Attalids? I mean, there's all those books, you know, what can you say? But there's always something to say. And, you know, and then there were new finds and people were looking at materials more closely and so forth. The only suggestion I would say, I mean, if you want to come in contact, just contact me and we can have a Zoom session to give you advice on graduate schools. Just choose a good graduate school, a good advisor who cares about you. Don't spend too much time in graduate school because that's terrible. And you know, make strategic moves and build a network to find a job.
Very good, thank you. And another question from Cecilia. She says, Selefsida is in Spanish. Let me see, she stopped here.
Let me see.
Selefsida in Spanish. I don't know what she wants to say.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I didn't know the word, no.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Okay, the next question is from Savas Hoxoglu. I have observed that the Turks in their media consistently avoid to use the term Greek when referring to ancient Greek sites and finds in Turkey. Do you agree?
Well, of course not. If it is something is Greek, And it's
No,
like,
he wants to say, I suppose, if you agree with his observation that the Turks avoid to say that. Do they avoid or not?
It depends. I mean, I've seen people who avoid to write Greek when they find a Greek inscription, but when they publish it, they say Greek, but not officially. I've heard people say, yeah, it's not just the Greeks there, which is true. But on the other hand, you know, when you mix politics with history, that's a terrible thing because the historian has to be absolutely neutral and just read the evidence. Do I agree that there are other people in modern day Turkey? There were other ethnicities, of course there were. I mean, they have left signs. Were there Greeks? Of course. Were they dominant at some point? Depends, yes. But the Hellenistic culture is not, it's a mistake to call Hellenistic something only Greek. It is Greek. It is very heavily influenced by Greek, but there is a fusion of cultures. When you have a fusion of cultures coming together, they create something new. Yes, there were, I mean, the Greek language was spoken. It was the international language. We know Cleopatra spoke 8 or 9 languages, but she didn't speak Latin, we think. So she was talking only in Greek because even the educated Romans, they wouldn't speak Latin, they would speak Greek. It was the language of the time, the lingua franca. Were the Greeks around? Sure. Did they believe they were Greek? Sure. We hear, I mean, there were Egyptian Greeks and Theocritus, for example, the Adoniazus. There are women who speak in the idiom of the Doric idiom of Syracuse. They say, I'm of Syracusan descent. We are Dorians, so we speak Dorian Greek. And actually, as they go out, the girlfriend's out, and they speak, someone makes fun of them and say, oh, you know, you're Dorian. And she says, yeah, I'm from Syracuse. What do you want? And it's like the Americans say, you know, I'm Irish, whatever. But of course, they don't speak. Well, I guess, okay. I'm drawing a parallel. It's not the same exactly, but you know, sure.
And another question from Cecilia. What is the Turkish attitude towards the Greek heritage in their country?
I mean, the archaeologists I've met are good archaeologists. I mean, they don't really twist anything.
Okay.
They don't, they really don't. But I mean, no, I know archaeologists who even study the modern period, the early modern and the presence of Greeks, and they have no problem saying this. I mean, politics is another matter. Now, you are not going to go to Erdogan in order to learn Greek history or history of the region, because he's going to tell you whatever he wants. But scholars, no, they're fine.
Yeah, very good. Stefanos, do you have any questions from Facebook?
No, I haven't seen any.
Okay, okay. Go
But
ahead.
I submitted one more question if you have the patience to handle one more question. Maybe you mentioned it because I was busy doing things, but another reason the name Attalos is well known is from the Stoa of Attalos, which is in Athens.
I showed it.
And I found that it comes from Attalos II. It was erected by him.
Yeah, it was erected by Attalus II.
Can you elaborate on that? It looks like he was educated in Athens and he wanted to.
Attalus II was educated in Athens. Eumenes II was not. He stayed in Pergamon close to his dad, but he did travel to Athens. He did take part in the Panathenaic Games. We have inscriptions. Yeah, he did. I mean, several Attalids started in Athens. Actually, Attalus II even set up a statue to his teacher from, I think, the academy, if I remember well. But anyway, yeah, it was him. But Attalus I also set up another stoa in Delphi, and Eumenes II set up the stoa on the foot of the Acropolis.
Very good. So this was the last question. Thank you very much, Professor Kosmetatou, for the lecture. It was very fascinating, and the discussion with the questions was also very informative. So I wish everybody a very nice summer, and we are looking forward to join us again in October. Stefanos, you can close the session.